Welcome to this episode of Soul Portals. And specifically in this conversation, we're going to talk about individual and collective evolution. So I like to start with an opening invocation, short one, the blessing on our session, which is, may the spirit flow freely through this conversation, allowing it to be both edifying and energizing. And of benefit to everyone watching or listening. And then I have a little quote. Usually we do a quote or a reading, but this is a short one that really pertains to the theme of your book, which is evolution and consciousness. So the quote is by the Charles Schulz, the famous Peanuts cartoonist. So he says, life is like a 10-speed bicycle. Most of us have gears we never use. And that's kind of how you kicked off your book. Most of us have gears we never use. So now to introduce our guests briefly, they can always read your bios, but we just want to know who you are, what you are, and where you are.
Sure.
So ladies first.
Okay. Thanks, Cedric. My name is Maeve Halpin, and I'm an Irish counselling psychologist. And I've also been practicing or trying to practice in Buddhism for about 15 years now. And Michael contributed, the co-author of this book, Michael Delmonte here, he contributed a chapter on meditation to a previous book, which I compiled on natural approaches to mental health. It's called How to Be Happy and Healthy. So it was a combination really of Eastern and Western approaches to mental health from a holistic point of view. And so then myself and Michael have collaborated on this later book, which really expands a lot of the ideas in that previous book.
Yes, it's a really fascinating book. There it is. It has a great subtitle. It says everything. I mean, it covers such a wide spectrum. So
Cedric, can you say the name of the title and the subtitle for those that might not see us but would be listening?
Right, thank you. So Evolution and Consciousness, revised edition. From a barren rocky earth to artists, philosophers, meditators, and psychotherapists. So that's everybody in this, everybody and anybody who's in the growing club, as we sometimes called it. So Michelo, you've done so much research that culminated in this book. So just a brief who you are, what you are, where you are. Well, you're both in Dublin.
It was basically at home that I learned about mindfulness and meditation and Eastern philosophies, because that's what my parents talked about, and that's what they practiced. They were very much into meditation, and they started a school of philosophy and a school of meditation here at home. And I just went along to those things. I suppose in reaction to that, when I went to university, I studied genetics. I kind of went the whole other way. I wanted to know about the physical world, about practical things, how the body is put together. And I found I was quite interested in human genetics, but at the time, they're only really interested in bacteria and viruses. And I was a bit bored with genetics. And I also found it wasn't answering my questions. So I turned to psychology, and I found that fascinating. I just absolutely couldn't get enough of it. Compared to genetics, which was kind of hard work and a bit dry, I found psychology really fascinating. And then, well, what am I going to do with psychology? So first I began to work with school children as a school psychologist, and how they could learn, and how they could be educated using psychological principles. But then I became interested in psychotherapy, and I studied psychotherapy. I found the work of Jung really interesting. I found the work of constructivism really interesting too. And so later on, I was trying to see how I could combine my understanding of biology, where I started, with my understanding of psychology, with my understanding of the more spiritual practices. And hence the book really reflects that journey.
Mm.
It reflects the journey from biology, the concrete, the embodiment, right up to the mind, and beyond that to the transcendental. It's a long journey. It's a very long journey, and you know, it's not complete. I don't think we ever finish these journeys, but that's really where it all came from.
Mm.
And in that journey, at the stage when I was interested in mindfulness and interested in meditation, that's how I met Maeve. And in fact, we did some work together. Maeve was writing a book at the time. And we put our heads together, and the cross-fertilization led to the book, basically. And that's where we are. That's where we are now.
Yeah, you do a great job in the book of doing the micro and the macro, like showing how individual development evolution it mirrors the humankind's evolution. So
yeah.
you
I was
yeah.
always very frustrated with reductionism, be it genetic reductionism, or even be it psychological reductionism, or even actually spiritual reductionism. I know it sounds strange, but I think a single focus. I would get uncomfortable in any group that had too narrow a focus. I felt that they're just leaving out so much of human experience.
Right.
And the other thing, I was always interested in anthropology. That's a hobby more than anything else. Why people across the world have different cultures, different religions, think and behave differently. And so it's the human family. Oops, sorry.
Speaking of the human family,
I'm going to have to move this bird. Sorry, I forgot about her. Sorry.
No, she's welcome. She's welcome.
No, she doesn't want to go. Sorry about that. That's my pet.
No, she's welcome.
She's normally in the cage, but she doesn't. I'm going to have to ask Patricia to put her back in the cage. Maya, go away. Sorry about that. She's very. She's. Sorry, I'm going to beg your pardon. I'm going to have to move her.
No, that's perfect.
Yes, and that's what we're here for, to learn more about who you are, not just what the book is about.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing your pet.
Except Michelo didn't hear that.
Well, he will on the replay. So.
I think parrots can live till about 90 years of age, actually. But
Yeah.
we have to ask Michael. Can parrots live to be quite old, Michael?
Yes, this particular species, she reaches about the age of 93. So it's more for the grandchildren.
Wow.
Okay, Michelo.
I'm sorry about that interruption.
No, don't be sorry.
No worries.
Let me read you a Zen story about that moment, okay? The Zen master prepared to give a sermon to a group of his students. Suddenly, a bird began singing, and all listened in silence. When the bird song had ceased, the master said, "That is the sermon," and went his way.
I think her name is Maya. You know, Maya is the veil.
Yeah.
Maya, she was. I'm not sure whether she's objecting to what I was saying or whether she wanted to bring things down to earth. I think she's trying to bring things down to earth. Get me off my high pedestal.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. To fly out of the ivory tower and over the landscape.
Yes.
So yeah, it's a natural segue for both of you, because one of our soul portals is soul summons. So, you know, a personal turning point or transition which changed the direction. I think you already said it, Michelo, of your life's work. So over to Maeve, if you have a conversion story.
Conversion might be a bit strong a word, but my earlier career was, I studied in Trinity and UCD, And I did undergraduate psychology and then counseling psychology. And then I also studied women's studies and I studied social and organizational psychology. So for me, that was like the psychology is about the personal, and women's studies was about political, and organizational psychology is about the social, you know. So I found that I loved all that study. I really enjoyed it. And later then on in my 40s, I was reading discourse analysis and really enjoying that. But like at the time, there were no apps or not many websites or anything like that even. And I'd heard that learning to meditate would be helpful to deal with stress. So I just had to Google it and found myself in a little Buddhist center that wasn't far from where I lived at the time. And I had absolutely no concept that anything religious had anything to offer me. Not that I was an atheist or anything, but like I hadn't seen anything in religion that was going to be helpful to me. So I had to continue going to these classes because it took me a really long time to learn to meditate. And I found the classes fascinating, listening to other people's experience of trying to practice meditation while they were learning, because people's experiences were so different. And so I continued on and I read some of the books, and then I started to do a course on introduction to Buddhism. And then I did the next course, follow on from that. This was with a group that at the time were called the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order, and they're now called Triratna. And they were set up by an English Buddhist monk called Sangharakshita in the 60s in London. He lived in India for a long time. So it's like I was drawn back to it all the time, even though I didn't really know what it was about at all. And like, as I stuck with it, like the whole thing just became a doorway to another universe for me. That's literally what it was. Like the practice of meditation combined with the study of the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, and the practices of mindful living and the ethical guidelines and so on. They all came together for me to fundamentally really allow me to experience many other levels of consciousness that nothing else had ever given me in my day-to-day life, you know. So like, I think, well, one way I think of it now is that the West has made incredible progress in understanding the external world with our science and technology and medicine and so on. And it's the Far East who have gone inwards and mapped the topology of the inner life, really, and given us the tools to enter there, you know. I also think of the West kind of as the world of the head and the East as the world of the heart, because the heart is very much emphasized in Buddhism and in Hinduism, as far as I know. And the practices of compassion, sympathetic joy, and so on are fundamental, you know, central to the practice of Buddhism. So I feel that in our globalized world now, we're very lucky to have these two kind of split halves coming together.
Yeah.
And the people of the East, of course, want what we produce. They want new technology and new advances in medicine and all of these great things that we have, and we want what they have. And so many people, in my experience, are drawn like a magnet to Buddhism. It's not the only route, of course. I think there's probably, well, I'm sure there's infinite routes to the spiritual world, because everyone's is fundamentally unique, and people find their path in so many different ways, you know.
Right.
So I feel myself extremely lucky that I happened to stumble across it, you know, without looking at it. And then I made a Sri Lankan friend there and a Malaysian friend, and three of us set up a Theravada Buddhist group in Dublin, the Irish Sangha Trust, because there was only one Theravada group in Dublin and it was kind of fading. The people were aging in it. There was only a small group. So we've been running that now since 2011, and we invite in monks and nuns and lay teachers from abroad, and we have a regular weekly meditation sit, and that's been very nurturing to have a Sangha as well. So, and to be able to contribute and to bring the Dharma to others, you know. So obviously all of these teachings have had a huge influence on psychotherapy and counseling. You know, books like Compassionate Mind, for instance, and there's a website called selfcompassion.org by Christian Neff, and I'd often share these things with my clients, not to obviously proselytize, but just to give them tools that are going to help them in their journey of understanding themselves and developing.
What you're saying reminds me of a book by Bede Griffiths, who had a Christian ashram in India. And his book was The Marriage of East and West.
All right. Okay. I
Yeah.
must have a look at that one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And also it corresponds with the left brain, right brain
It does.
discoveries and research.
Yeah.
It
And you
also,
could
Yes.
you could say with the male and female.
Yeah.
yes, it also speaks to bringing that somatic piece into the therapy process. You know, it's not all in the head. It's
Yes.
bringing your body experience into the room. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I often ask people, you know, how do you sleep? How's your diet? Do you get exercise? All these are very practical, physical things that influence our mental health and our emotional well-being. So that's an integrated kind of approach that I would use with people as well, you know. And we never touched on any of that when I was training. Maybe now they do, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But like also to bring in a spiritual dimension, I often ask clients, you know, do you have any kind of spiritual or religious kind of thing going on? And a lot of people have, and typically it's not in any organized religion, but they have some sense of something larger. And I find that people can, in therapy, they can draw on that as a resource as well. And it can help them have a different kind of perspective on their suffering and their difficulties. And they can move more quickly through the therapy.
Yes.
Yeah.
All these things have been emerging. Even the word psychospiritual is now becoming part of the vocabulary. And to do a spiritual assessment with your clients is considered part of competency now. So there's a book, there's manuals like how to do a spiritual assessment, you know, it's completely non-sectarian. It is essential to people's lives. Yeah.
Well, and it's also being able to sort out the implicit content of a session and the explicit content. Sometimes, as you said, Maeve, you know, they may not speak to it in religious terms, but they understand some sense. And so if we can help guide them in that direction so that they are comfortable talking about it, then all the better.
And I feel the ideas that came through, like it was from Sangharakshita, that English monk, that I first came across the concept of the evolution of consciousness. He called it higher consciousness. And I remember listening to one of his talks as I was walking along the beach in Waterford, and it really hit me like a bolt from the blue, because I thought, oh my God, evolution. Like it's one of the most powerful forces on the planet. Like it brought us up from the oceans and down from the trees and into civilization. Like how could it have stopped? That was what the thought that struck me. So the reality that we're still evolving through consciousness makes a huge amount of sense to me. And especially, like apparently children, ever since IQ tests were invented, children are more intelligent. They have to keep moving the mean so that it's still 100 points in terms of the average. And like we've moved so far forward in the 20th century with human rights, equal rights, you know, equality, democracy, like these are all very radical changes that are very recent in human history. People be taken for granted. So, and young people are very conscious and aware and accepting and open and inclusive, all these good things. That's what I see in Ireland anyway. So I can see consciousness evolving. It's great to feel that this is a force that nobody can stop. And, you know, and I suspect that's why religions don't like it, you know, because they know they can't own it. They can't co-opt it, you know, they can't make money out of it. So they need to deny it, I suspect.
But the forerunners it's happened in every religion that the real mystics and the forerunners are on the leading edge, and they're the ones who get excommunicated and persecuted until the rest come around.
For sure, yeah, for sure.
I'm wondering, Michelo, do you have an essential spiritual practice of your own that you do regularly, like that grounds you?
Well, I think like when I was young, I used to meditate every day and did so for years and years. I think I became more interested in mindfulness to be honest. I think that would probably be what would attract me more these days. The other thing would be that in my work, I find that paying deep attention to your clients, I think that really is something that benefits a lot from practicing mindfulness. I think that's really the essence of deep listening. I saw a bit of research which show that psychotherapists that have a practice of mindfulness, that they tend to get better results, and I'm not surprised. I think you tune into what I call the transference and the counter-transference better, and you learn to pay attention better. That would be really, in my daily life, I would say, I do a bit of yoga. Every day I do some yoga, I like that. So there are many different things like that, but the formality of meditation, not so much like I used to. Did a lot of that over the years, and maybe I think I enjoyed the mindfulness more. Maybe that's what happened, really.
Yeah, so it's for the since there's such an overlap, but you're making a distinction. So for the benefit of people listening, could you say something about the difference between meditation and mindfulness? Because they have a lot in common.
Well, okay. One normally starts off practice with samatha. Samatha is concentration meditation. It could be on a candle flame. It can be on a far flame. It can be on your breath. It can be on a mantra. So you learn to focus your mind, a narrow focus of samatha. And I think that's a very good grounding, because you learn to really focus and pay attention. The vipassana is the kind of opening up the wide angle. And the wide angle is taking in the bigger picture. There's quite a bit of research now on this, showing that the samatha, the concentrative meditation, it's much more left hemisphere. And you actually get a shift to the left hemisphere by practicing this kind of meditation. Whereas the mindfulness, the vipassana, is more a shift to the right hemisphere, because it's a broad angle, inclusive look at the world. So you're actually using different hemispheres in these different techniques.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that the right hemisphere is much more linked to empathy. So mindfulness tends to, the practice of mindfulness and being mindful does tend to enhance empathy more than, say, the narrow focus. The narrow focus is a discipline. But the mindfulness is an opening up. And so I want to also talk about how this might go into my work, because I think when patients come into me, there are three levels. They come in with often childhood deficits, things they've missed in their childhood, things they have not had, things that have been done to them that shouldn't have been done to them, etc. They're deficits, and they're the first thing I would tend to deal with in therapy. The next thing are the conflicts, the kind of little battles you have with your siblings and with your parents. They're not so important, but they are important, but they're not deficits. And then the third stage is the growth, and that's where often you're talking about the spiritual side comes in much more then, where people are not just necessarily looking to the past like Freud would, or into the present conflicts, but more to the future, a more Jungian kind of approach. And I think that's the way I tend to work with people. I look for the deficits first, then I look at the conflicts, and then I look at the growth. All that can take, in some cases, can take months or years, depending. But so there are different levels, I think, of working.
Yeah, that's the trajectory, right?
Trajectory, yes, exactly. So each person is very different. Some people are very keen to get to the growth bit. Others go there too quickly. I think that bit like bypass, what we call spiritual bypass, where you try to immediately go to the growth and you neglect to look at all the basic faults, deficits,
Yeah.
what we call fault lines, and conflicts which are kind of ignored and bypassed and not
Yeah.
dealt with.
And you never get away with it
You
because
don't
you have
get
to go
away with
back
it.
and do the work you missed.
Right.
You've got to go back and do the work you've missed. And I think that is something, I would have seen a lot of people do that. I think in Ireland we had quite a bit of that because we had a lot of nuns and priests, more perhaps than any other country per capita. And you could see the struggles they were having. Their struggles trying to just be, at a very young age, engaging with the spiritual. I remember when I was young, I would see lines and lines of boys who were lined up to become priests, walking into the streets in dark uniforms. And it had a terrible thing because I worked a lot with priests and nuns in the past, and they had huge issues which had never dealt with. They never dealt with their sexuality, for example. That was a real problem. They didn't properly deal with relationships either, and behind all of that, there's a huge amount of anger and frustration that comes out sideways. Now, I'm not saying they all had this problem, but many of them did, and you would see it in other people too. That sidestepping. John Mayne, you know, the John Mayne of fame.
I'm very familiar with
sidestepping, and I think meditation can be used to sidestep.
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to get at. I could spend a lot of time just meditating, and it was very good. A lot of things would come up during meditation, actually, that you come into your awareness. But I like the idea of engaged Buddhism. I like the idea that it's not just in your head it stays, but we are embodied. We are on this planet. Who knows what happens later on? But so it's that. So the application will be very important. Application to one's work and to one's life.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answered your question, but
yes, you have, of course.
Yes.
It's funny that you should mention John Mayne because I was there in the 80s when he founded the Benedictine Priory in Montreal. So I knew him and his successor, Father Lawrence. So what's interesting is we used to go and meditate with the monks, and all of the monks, mostly all of them, had bad backs. Speaking of the somatic, they all had back issues.
I'm not sure if you want to go into too much about that, but psychoanalysts have a view of what bad backs are all about. But
well, you can tell us in a nutshell.
Well, it's the absence of sexual frustrated sexuality. Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying it is that, but they would come to that conclusion.
Right.
But
it's a hypothesis.
Yeah.
Well, and I find it interesting that Maeve, you meditate, and Michelo, you're more into mindfulness. And what I'm seeing is people think it has to be one or the other, like one is better than or less than the other. And I think the goal would be to allow people to understand that either one, just whatever fits you. So Michelo talking about the right brain and the left brain, that makes perfect sense. That some people are lean toward meditation while others don't. They lean toward mindfulness once they understand what that is.
Yeah. And it relates to what Maeve was saying about East and West, because it's no accident that the Vipassana is popular in the West, because we need the wider scope and the heart-centered and the witnessing and the being as opposed to doing.
I wouldn't want to give the wrong impression. I think meditation is really important. I love the kind of meditation where you're focusing on your breath and your posture. I started at such a young age. I was about 14 or 15. I did years and years of it. And I was kind of more excited about the mindfulness side later on. But that's you answer your question. But I think they go together. I really do think they go together. And I know Maeve is also very interested in mindfulness, so I don't want to.
For sure. I think everybody has to find their own way. You know, like one person was saying to me, I'm not able to sit and meditate, but I swim like 10 lengths every morning or every second morning, and it's the rhythmic movement, where she finds that really clears her mind, or for some people it might be running. It's more physical than sitting still. So, but they're doing it at some level. There's some, spiritual level of perspective of or experience in it for them,
Right. There's intention.
It's intention, yeah. So, like, I don't think we can prioritize anything over anything else because people are so individual, and each person has to find what is going to work for them, I think, and be open-minded about that.
Agree.
I mean, mindfulness can be applied to so many things. Listening to music, for example, listening to the wind, looking at nature, looking at the waves. We live here by the sea, and just looking at the waves, the skyline, the skyscape. I also swim every day, by the way, and I like in the Irish Sea, it gets pretty cold in winter, and I find that something very interesting about that because it is such an embodied experience, the deep cold, that it completely empties your mind. Go into the sea and you have some worry or some thought or some feeling. By the time you come out, you've forgotten what it was about. It's plunging into the here and now. It's complete emptying of the mind. And that kind of thing, or even I think for people who go horse riding, for example, you're on the back of a horse, you haven't got time to be anxious about anything except falling off, maybe. So there are many things you can do mindfully, and yoga, for example. Yeah, and this thing about emptying your mind, again, we only empty the mind in order to give it a break and to fill it again, not to stay empty. So a lot of these techniques of disengagement, detachment, non-attachment. I remember when I was learning about all of these, maybe I took them too literally initially, and then I began to think, but can that be? But there's something prematurely wrong with that. We all have to let go of the body and of the mind when we die, but we don't need to do that throughout our lives. It's something we can do momentarily, but not as a way of living. So I think the social engagement bit, I think, is so important, and I think I think people who try to avoid that, maybe some people are comfortable with it, but the people we see would not be. They're mostly people living in the real world with jobs and families.
Right. Yes, that there's a great line in your book about meditation should allow the ego to just be ego.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of the like the false side of spirituality, there's a lot of violent language used to eliminate the ego, destroy it, that it's good for nothing, but like you said, it has its role. And like someone else said, we need the ego because to know where the car keys are.
Right.
For sure.
Yeah.
And like from a spiritual perspective, like the ego should be shaped within an ethical response to the world as well, and all our religions, to be fair to them, they've all given us guidelines, on how to do that. And fundamentally, I think they're all about evolution, really. They're about moving us away from our instinctive, reactive animal instincts to a way where we can respond consciously and mindfully to the world around us, like with compassion, with forgiveness, with kindness, with lack of judgment, with care towards others. And it's not just that we won't go to hell or something, if we obey the commandments, that actually improves the quality of our own inner life, if we can live like that, And so, like in the book, we talk about the axial age, which was a time 200, 600 BC when the different religions emerged in the world around the same time, Greece, China, the Middle East, and so on. And that seems to me, well, at least we suggested in the book, that was kind of an evolutionary spurt in humanity where we evolved to be able to experience the transcendent, and that people were putting a kind of language around that practices at the time. So I feel at the heart of religions there's something extremely important and useful and practical, actually, but obviously they keep getting turned into power and money systems, you know, and people have to refine the spiritual impulse again, which they do over and over, and it's called the perennial philosophy.
Exactly. Yeah. Didn't Jung say that somebody is best to take up a practice after they're 40? He used that as the age, you know, by we would hope to have a moral foundation and maturity, and
Yes.
because otherwise we get the phenomenon that we see a lot, which is the gurus and the teachers who are teaching enlightenment and then are exposed for basic bad behavior.
Oh yeah.
Like so.
Yeah.
You need to be, it's a very good point you make. I mean, you need to be a good human being and then build on it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think an effective human being, like what Michael was talking about there, like engaging with the world and going through all the ups and downs, all the failures, the successes, the betrayals, the losses, all of these things are what forge the ego, you know.
Exactly.
And there's the famous phrase, you know, you have to be somebody before you can be nobody.
Yeah.
Like we have to be able to, you know, experience transcendence, but return back to a functioning ego afterwards. And what can happen with people, spiritual experiences can be extremely powerful. And when people experience them when they're young, I think the ordinary world can seem very mundane by comparison, you know,
Right.
and they can cleave to the spiritual life when they're still quite young and they don't really mature.
Or it takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
There is a big malaise in the world these days, nevertheless. I agree that there's evolution and development, but there's also a kind of idea going around that we're some kind of accident, a kind of a fluke. We're all here. We're all here. That we are in our little personal lives. We are conscious, and then we're gone. We're dead, and that's basically it. And somehow all of this was an accident. That an unintelligent, unconscious universe somehow produced us. But how? That's the big mystery. So you have the Big Bang, and then you have our solar system. We have this barren, rocky Earth that I talk about in the book, that we talk about in the book. And yet, out of this rocky Earth, we produce this incredible complexity of technology, of philosophy, of psychology, of art, of music, all this beauty, and also all the horrible stuff we do. And that all came from a rocky, inert planet. So I think a lot of people are confused. The kind of meaninglessness that life has no purpose, it's going nowhere. And of course, if you look at it from the Big Bang perspective, then it does look like it's going somewhere. It shows that actually that matter evolves and life evolves and consciousness evolves. And that is really what the book's about, showing that from the Big Bang, everything slowly and evolves, but it is evolving at a faster and faster rate as we go along. The universe is expanding more and more rapidly, but so is our cultural evolution expanding more and more rapidly. I think in my lifetime, we've seen so much change. It's hard to imagine about the change we've seen. It's hard to imagine our attitudes towards animals, towards children, towards women, towards sexuality. It's not the same. When I was young, those ideas were so strange. You couldn't imagine two men getting married together, for example. It just all that stuff, and so we are in a phase of rapid expansion. I'd love to be around in 100 years' time and see what we've done with it. But I also agree with Jung's idea of the shadow. I think there's also a dangerous side to all of this. The book of Job, I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the book of Job, but in the book of Job, Jung says, well, this idea that God, nature, is all good, it's a bit simplistic. Now, of course, that's the Old Testament, but there is this idea that maybe we can be terribly mean, we can be horrible, we can be brutal, in fact, we can be destructive, we can destroy our own planet. All that's there too. There's a shadow is there.
Yeah.
And if one equates God with nature like Spinoza does, then we have to bear in mind that we also have the capacity to destroy that which could be so good.
Mm.
And I think that's another message, that there is purpose. We are heading somewhere. I don't know where we're heading, but I'm sure we are heading somewhere. And I think we should take charge of where we're going. I think that's the message, that we shouldn't be passive riders on a spacecraft. We should be directing the spacecraft.
Right.
That is
That-
part of what I'm thinking about the book.
That was, Colin Wilson and his work, his 100 books. That was his theme about we can take charge of higher levels of consciousness. But
Yeah.
you're anticipating the burning question, which is how do you explain devolution, especially at this time with the terrorism, the wars, the worst of human behavior.
Mhm.
How does, I've always marveled, been astonished that you have extremes of evolution existing in the same time frame on the same planet. Like the most quote unquote primitive and the most enlightened, and we're together. So how do you, what's your context for that? How does devolution relate to evolution?
Well, can I just quickly answer that briefly, because
Sure.
I have to leave at 5. In a sentence, like, the human lifespan is maybe 80 years, and if you're watching a child growing up, every day is not necessarily in advance of the day before. Like, there's lots of ups and downs in our own evolution through our own lifespan, and we go through really bad times and we can come back up again, and children trying to regress under stress, and then they can come out of that again. So it's not a straight line, linear upward movement all the time. Like, over time, the direction is upwards,
Yeah.
but not on a moment basis. That's my thinking on it.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah.
basis for hope. So not to go be discouraged or despairing when we see the downswing.
Yeah, it's not downswing though. It's not. It's the overall push is upwards,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and nothing can stop it.
Uh-huh.
Exactly. I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the
Mhm.
temporary, the ups and downs, the way you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's ups and downs in our own lives in the same way. It's just playing out over a much longer time span.
Right.
And
With the
over a
human
much
race.
broader landscape. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the same is true for our planet. We've had periods of great coldness and heat.
Mm.
The planet has been through all kinds of destructive moments, the death of the dinosaurs. But the overall pattern and the big picture, we're moving somewhere. I like the idea of Teilhard de Chardin, the French philosopher, Jesuit, I think, talks about the complexification consciousness, that as we become more complex, our consciousness also becomes more complex. So over time, you have to see it over time. Over time, things are definitely improving, but there is the possibility of a nuclear war, for example. So we shouldn't be naive. We shouldn't. You see, there's a real danger when you push away the shadow. I think that's back to the spiritual thing. I would have seen a lot of priests and nuns pushing away their shadows. And people, we all do, not just priests and nuns, we all do. And so when you do that, you diminish yourself, but you also diminish your capacity to respond to your shadow, to do something with it, to integrate it. So I think evolution is best seen as taking the whole picture, the not just the light but the darkness too into account. That's probably so. Like these days, yes, it's quite depressing with the planet and the warfares and things like that. But nevertheless, I am optimistic. I'm not a pessimist about these things. I am actually optimistic. The book is actually quite optimistic.
Oh, that comes
I'm
through.
reading it.
Yeah.
I think maybe some people think it's too optimistic. I'm not sure. But
No, but you put that in a good context, with
yeah,
the shadow work and the not a straight upward line. Yeah. Can I ask a couple of fun questions before we wrap?
yep.
I definitely have to go at 6, just to let
Okay.
you know.
We're 5 minutes, so we can start wrapping. So
Okay.
when you help people, are you like a lamp, a lifeboat, or a ladder? If you had to choose.
Are they the only 3 choices?
No, you can bring in another metaphor.
If I had to choose one of them, it would be a lamp, I think.
Yeah.
Enlightenment.
Yes.
Bring enlightenment.
And you, Michelo?
Well, I would have said the same as Maeve, but I would have said all 3. I think sometimes people jump on board because they're sinking. They and I think you need the enlightenment to go up the ladder. So I would combine all 3.
Oh, good. Okay.
Very good.
And do you guys know the book Psychotherapy East and West by Alan Watts?
Yeah.
On your theme, that was kind of a groundbreaking book
Yes.
on your theme.
Indeed. Watts, he was an inspired person.
Yes.
Yes. Alan Watts was very much against any kind of dogmatic approach to the religions and to the practices.
Yeah.
And I would agree entirely with him on that.
Yeah. Anyway,
and humor. He had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
He was pulling our legs much of the time, actually. He was not to take him too seriously.
A trickster.
A trickster and a humorist.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, you fulfilled the mandate to be energizing and edifying. So thank you for that.
Yes.
Thank you.
And it was a great, it could have been a week-long workshop, and we condensed it into an hour. So
and the link for the book, I can send you the link for the book, Cedric, so that people can buy if they wish.
And we'll put that out, with the podcast description. And
great.
In the meantime, bless the moment, trust yourselves, and expect the best.
Well, thank you for having us. It's really great to see you all.
Thank you for sharing from your personal.
Pleasure. I'm sorry about the Maya attacking me in the middle of the session.
Oh, that was perfect.
And the sound problems upstairs. So, but anyway.
At least people will know that we're not AI, Michael.
No. We're making so many
parrot appears from the nowhere.
Mistakes. We're making so many mistakes. We've got to be normal. Yes.
Exactly. Okay. Thanks so much, Cedric and Dee.
Thank you.
I appreciate that. It was really, I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yes.